Hey guys, got a fresh voice here. Welcome you to the Borderlands podcast. It's your boy Wolfrunner, Brian Peterson here. You already know the guest today as we turn the tables. Josh Rosenthal. Want to say hi to everybody?
Hey, it's good to be here. It's fun to
Yeah,
hit record and not be the one hosting.
exactly right. It's got to feel a little bit uncomfortable, so
It's
we'll keep you
different.
on the hot seat. But
Okay.
yeah, I hit Josh up a little while ago and said, "Hey, let's get to know the man behind the mic, the one that's always asking the questions and always putting out the cool cuts. He's got the best music, I think, in the running space, best intro,
Thanks.
best outro. So." Yeah, he seems like a fascinating guy. Wanted to get to know him better, kind of unpack the story a little bit more, and yeah, just kind of bring his character to light. So this one should be a fun one for everyone, guys. You ready? You excited?
Yeah, what I'm excited about is that you're such a good question asker or contemplative, prior to the episode, you kind of thought through stuff quite a bit. So as someone who's going to receive the questions, I'm super curious and interested and excited.
Yeah, awesome, man. So, I mean, one of the first things that jumps off, everybody kind of knows, you kind of got started out in Lubbock, Texas,
Uh-huh.
and we're kind of the same age.
Yeah,
I'm 42. I'll be 43 next year. So, I mean, we're
yep.
right there. We grew up in the
Almost
same,
42. Yep.
yeah, grew up in the same era.
Yeah.
Funny enough, my wife is actually from the Panhandle, so she's just
What?
about 120 miles north of you in Amarillo, little town called Dumas is where she
Oh,
spent
I know
her.
Dumas.
Yeah,
Is she my age too?
she is. Yeah, she left Texas, I think, about around 8. So she
Okay.
spent her early childhood there. And I've
No
gone
way.
back to Amarillo, so I can at least
What?
envision what it was that you saw
Dude,
as a
that's
young
crazy.
full energy kid, in
Yep.
Texas. So
Out in
yeah,
the Panhandle Plains. That's crazy. That's a small world.
yeah. So I grew up in Orange County, California. So just to contrast it, wildly different,
Yeah.
wildly different.
Yeah, you had the OC was the TV show about you, and I had Friday Night Lights. That was the TV show about me.
Exactly. Dad, I don't want your life, right? You were basically like the Varsity Blues life.
Totally. Yep. 100%.
So yeah, I mean, late '80s, early '90s. Paint the picture. What's Lubbock like?
Whew. Lubbock is the really it's extraordinarily flat and extraordinarily. If you grow up there, it's extraordinarily uninteresting unless you do the research to understand why it's amazing. But I didn't do that until many years later. So I just desperately wanted to get out of Lubbock because Lubbock, there was like this really strong like religious component, and I don't necessarily always use that word negatively, but when religion begets like rules and one upping each other and saying, no, I'm more religious than you, no, I'm more religious than you, that was a big thing in Lubbock. Even though I made my best friends to this day are my junior high and high school friends. Lubbock was kind of a hard place for someone who thought like me. Living in Paris now like feels like a great place for me. So by contrast, if Paris is a great place for me, uh, Lubbock was kind of challenging. I've got to have stimulus. I got to have all this stuff. So I was a skateboarding kid, listening to punk rock, playing in punk rock bands, and it's where Buddy Holly's from. It's where Roy Orbison's from. It's where Waylon Jennings is from.
You're stealing all
Natalie.
of my questions here. I mean, these were just like bullet points that I was going to hit off
Oh,
for you, but you go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
yeah. I
killing it.
mean, so there's so much stuff in Lubbock. And I'm a diehard Texas Tech football fan. My only regret in life is that my college diploma doesn't say Texas Tech. But it's Lubbock is a phenomenal place to be from. Not a great place for me to always be, but I can also see someday my wife and I, who's also from Lubbock, someday being back there for a season of life.
Okay. So, I mean, is it a normal like residential suburban environment that you grew up in? Is it more acreage and agriculture? What does it actually look like?
Yeah, so it felt like Lubbock feels like a bedroom community, but it doesn't have like a Dallas next to it. So it's just a really, really spread out. Every house has a big yard. I mean, I can't overemphasize how flat. From one side of Lubbock to the other on a topographical map is 3 feet difference. So it is so flat. That's why cotton grows so well from there. 66% of the world's cotton comes from a 90-mile radius of Lubbock, or at least it used to. So there's, it's just you've got to entertain yourself. One of the things that I always say about people who come from West Texas is they're really good at having conversations. We're good at sitting on the porch all night into the sunrise talking because there's nothing else to do. So we were great conversationalists.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, I can speak to the flatness, man. As soon as you get outside of like
terrifying.
Albuquerque or there's a couple other cities that I'm blanking on, but yeah, I'm just like, this is depressing.
Yeah, Dumas is the exact same way. Dumas would be different in that it's probably more brown with dirt in the air when the wind blows, and way more rural, way more agricultural than Lubbock.
Yeah, absolutely. So work ethic. Were you a good kid? Did you? I mean, you talk about a big land or a big front yard. Did you have to mow it? Like where you're an entrepreneur. You got a lot of things going on. Where did your work ethic come from?
Well, my dad was a hippie, so he was not a West Texas cowboy. His best friend growing up was Mickey Raphael, or known as Mickey Raphael. He played harmonica for Willie Nelson since 1973. I mean, hippie. My dad was a hippie's hippie, and he got shipped off to boarding school and went to high school with Bob Weir. Bob Weir was 2 years older than him. Went off and started the Grateful Dead. So my dad was this hippie's hippie.
Wow.
So he was not this like wake up at 5 farm kid work ethic guy. He was a psychologist at the maximum facility prison for the criminally insane. So that's what he did. And my mom was a teacher. So for me, it was my dad was really good at accepting me being countercultural and letting me just sort of like my hair was green. He let me listen to punk rock. He loved that the music I had was a little bit anti-establishment to a degree, Bad Religion, Dead Kennedys type stuff. He was supportive of all that. So the work ethic played itself out because on my mom's side was farming, agriculture, 5 generations deep into Central Texas. All that work ethic translated into my music and into my skateboarding. So I could skateboard for 8 hours in a day, 9 hours in a day on the same ledge, trying to grind the same ledge all day. Or I could write music and play music with my bands all day long. It didn't translate into schoolwork because my GPA junior or freshman, sophomore year was 1.7. And I failed PE even.
Right.
And then I couldn't get into any colleges, so I went to a junior college and eventually to Salt Lake. So that's the glimpse of Lubbock for me, and the parents that I had.
So you did follow in your dad's footsteps with the musical interest then, right? And then kind of expanded from there. That's kind of fascinating. I mean, same for me, and I wonder how many other young men that's basically their experiences, whatever their dad's passion or hobby or whatever it is that they saw their dad do is what they gravitated and poured their energy into. My dad played baseball, in a men's league that was pretty competitive. And so then, baseball was my livelihood growing up. And so, I can connect to you on that level in the sense that whatever I was indoctrinated in a good way, by my dad. Yeah. And then, it's really shaped, kind of who I am today as well. So
I played baseball, but it was never my dad's thing. Once I got into music, and my dad just died in the last year and a half now, and he always he loved me playing music more than me playing music. His heart broke when I decided to, in 2012, to sell everything and just settle in and stop traveling and with music and just, be located in Salt Lake. That was the hardest thing for him. That's what he wanted more. Baseball, it wasn't that he was unsupportive. It's just once I got into music, he was there for it.
Right. That sucks, man. Sorry to hear, man. So
yeah,
so that's cool. I mean, it definitely sounds like Lubbock is still in your bones, right? Probably can't ever get Texas out of you, as my wife tells me. She always says, that she's from Texas, so there's always that, proud lineage of going back to Texas, even though she's lived, most all of her adult life, in California and then now here out in Arizona. So
after I read a book called Empire of the Summer Moon. It's my favorite book of all time. Highly recommend it. It's the story of the Comanche Indians, the most brutal killers in the history of the world. And they were between Fort Worth and Albuquerque, and that was called Comancheria. And Lubbock and that whole area was like the spot where that the Comanches were. And that book paints a stunning picture of, in the same way that you look at the Alps and say, oh my goodness, the Alps are beautiful there. And the plains of West Texas are that, but the inverse of it, like that, it is so flat. It is actually special. the the explorers going through that area, like there's not even a tree. So how do you navigate flatness? They would it was called the staked plains. You'd have to put stakes in the ground like breadcrumbs. So when you would go out a certain distance, you'd have to come back. So it's, after reading that book, it was like, oh, this place actually is special. Though when you're a high school kid with big ambition and big dreams, it feels like, it feels really stifling instead of exciting.
So with that area having some good, rich musical lineage as well, you mentioned the Buddy Holly and Waylon Jennings connection, which that's how I was going to link us together on the pod, is that Waylon was from your area, but he's buried in mine. His gravesite is right here outside of Phoenix.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they do every year. They do like an annual Waylon Jennings ride. So like all the the outlaw motorcycle guys will
I didn't
go
know
out
that.
to his gravesite and then ride to a little dive bar over here. So we've done that a few times. So yeah,
Oh, that's cool. I was listening to the Highwaymen just this morning. Like I love that whole era of music. But the music school I went to in West Texas was in Level Land, which, I mean, the names in West Texas are so uncreative. It's literally a level land, and it's a bluegrass music school. And there's the Waylon Jennings Performance Hall is where we did our performances.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So in that area then, musically, were you inspired by your surroundings, or because the area sometimes lacks inspiration, do you think that it gives you a bigger imagination where you're forced to kind of think outside of your immediate surroundings?
Yeah. I mean, I think of this as when my kids tell me that they're bored, I tell them that's the worst thing they can tell me, because my childhood was the best things came out of boredom. And in Lubbock, that's why there's so many phenomenal musicians that come out of there. There's nothing else to do. And so literally, I mean, fitness is not a big thing in West Texas. So running wasn't really a thing. You see someone running on the road, there's not even sidewalks everywhere. They get honked at. If your shorts are short and you're a guy running out there, I mean, good luck. It's not a forgiving place for that, but music it was. And literally we'd go out and we'd be in our friends' garages all day, because if we weren't doing that, the only other thing that we'd be doing, if not for skateboarding as well, is we would be watching VHS like Tooth and Nail, a record label I used to love. They'd put out these VHS tapes, but not very often. So if we weren't, we were either watching music or we were watching skateboarding, all the old skateboarding videos and releases that would come out from brands. So you get bored, and absolutely that's what inspires you out there, is like but it's an absurd boredness. There's nothing to do except when Texas Tech football is in town 6 Saturdays out of the year. Otherwise, nothing.
Right. Yeah. It's College Station? Is that the
Rival?
The name? That's the Rival, right?
That's the Rival. That's Texas A&M.
Yeah.
And that's the butt of all the Aggie jokes. There are some respectable people out there that have gone to A&M, but I'll tell you, you can spot them a mile away.
So that was the big game of the year, though, right? That was the one
yes, that's what you're saying. That was the game of the year. I heard the definition of rivalry is when you are more scared of losing. The fear of losing is greater than the joy of winning.
Right.
And the thought of losing to A&M was just the worst.
Yeah, I always those interstate rivalries like that were always fascinating, because then you've got like your, I don't know, Michigan, Ohio State, or like big rivalries that are like Notre Dame, USC, but then the ones that are like
interstate,
super close, right, just separated by a highway or whatnot. But like, that's intense right there, because you're going to see some of those folks.
So much fun.
Them, yeah.
Yes, and people from your high school go to that. Somehow, my high school in Lubbock, kids would go to A&M. I mean, everybody wanted to. I mean, a lot of people wanted to go to UT, and that made sense to me. UT made sense to me. A&M made no sense to me. I don't know if you've ever seen just how they present themselves, the band, the cheerleader, all that sort of stuff. It's just its own world.
Gotcha.
And 2 of my best friends went there. I don't get it. I still don't get it.
Right. You still don't forgive them for it, right?
I don't forgive them. Doesn't make sense, and they'll never hear the end of it.
Right. So right on. So then you got out of Lubbock, you said, when you went to school, or when you graduated and left?
Yeah. I graduated high school, one more year. My parents divorced when I was the baby of the family, and so they kind of waited. And then when I graduated high school, they split, and so my mom wanted to go do something adventurous, and so she went to Rio de Janeiro right at that time.
Wow.
And my brothers were still in Lubbock, but I was just unsure what I wanted to do. I did 1 year of college in Lubbock at South Plains College, where, oh man, I just learned that at South Plains College, this really random school, one of the guys, one of the main characters from the Sprint documentary went to college there.
Oh, really?
Not Noah Lyles, but the other dude who they pit up against each other, who ends up not winning, but was a world champion in the past. I can't think of his name.
Anyway. I haven't caught that series yet. So
once you see him, you'll know exactly who it is. I just can't think of his name.
Is he the tall guy, the super tall guy?
Yeah.
Girly or something with it.
I think that's right. Yeah. I looked him up. I was like, oh, I wonder where he's from. South Plains College. So I then went on a spring break trip my freshman year to Salt Lake, and I absolutely loved it. That was 2002. So I dropped out of school and moved there, and was there for almost 22 consecutive years before moving here to Paris.
Gotcha. And so Salt Lake was just kind of like a place that you saw opportunity for yourself to explore music further, or what was the impetus?
So I was coming out of high school. I was in a punk band that had toured. The only way I ever get out of Texas. So in Texas, you go on vacation in Texas. You don't leave Texas. If you love Texas and you're like 5th, 6th generation Texas, why would you ever leave it? So, we lived in Fort Worth for a little while before moving to Lubbock, and we would go to vacation in Austin or Schlitterbahn outside of between San Antonio, up Kerrville, up in this hill country of Texas. Only time we ever left Texas until I started playing punk rock and traveling was we went to Santa Fe because my dad had a friend who owned a hotel there. Otherwise, you just don't leave. And I just got real burned out though after that, like senior year of college from playing music and all that. So I'm all or nothing. So then I sold all my instruments. I've done this several times in my life. I sell all my instruments. I have nothing. I no longer identify myself as a musician, but I just wanted to go. So Salt Lake has big mountains. Lubbock is flat. I needed the opposite. I needed the inverse of what my life was at that point. I needed almost everything to be radically different than what I had been experiencing. And Salt Lake was all of those things. And I was pleasantly surprised by it because I talked at the beginning about like a religious culture, and we know, Salt Lake's a very religious culture,
right?
But I'm not of that religion, like so I don't feel the same constraint maybe that someone else in Salt Lake has always felt by, being Mormon and then not being Mormon, and how do you navigate that culture? A lot of people I knew my age were trying to get out of Salt Lake,
right? And
I couldn't communicate like loudly and clearly enough. Like Salt Lake gave me like. I feel like the last 5 years before that I had been breathing through a straw, and all of a sudden I moved to Salt Lake and I can take these deep, rich breaths, and I just felt so alive. And that's I didn't necessarily have employment. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything. It just gave me something, and I was young and single and unattached, and so I just went.
Right. And you probably didn't even realize, or do you think you were mature enough at the time to realize that, like, wow, like I'm migrating to an area that I find so valuable and beautiful and unique, and the people who are here my age are flocking, they're fleeing from it in a way that I am, right? Like it just kind of shows here that, like, where we're at in the perception of what our existence is just a case study of one, right? Like you would think nobody would want to leave Salt Lake, but then if it's all you've ever known, you're just as confined and wanting to rebel against it and forge your own path.
Everybody wants to leave their home. Right. But one of the key takeaways, and this is nothing new for me, but I lived it, and that is geography cannot make you happy. So if you're unhappy in Lubbock and you move to Salt Lake can't make you happy. It can probably cover your eyes for 6 to 9 months. Because it's so exciting. But once that wears off, if you're not happy in Lubbock, you're going to be not happy in Salt Lake. And so that's what everybody has to deal with. Like, they think it's their hometown. I thought it was my hometown. It took me, 12 years to figure out it wasn't my hometown. It was me. And I blamed Lubbock. But nevertheless, I think, at that 19 to 21-year-old age that, probably everybody to some degree, or they have their own version of the 19 to 21-year-old thing where they're just trying to figure out, where they should be, where is going to make most sense for them in their life, where could they be happy if they thought that geography did make them happy. And all of that sort of stuff was like a cocktail that I was mixing at the time.
Right. Yeah, that's wild. Again, just to contrast the differences, like being a kid in Orange County, California, in the late, 80s, early 90s, and there was basically like a complex that was developed. TV, Hollywood, like a lot of media, like everywhere you turned, you were kind of being, fed this idea that like you were where everybody wanted to be, and there was no imagination or desire to even leave. Like so.
Oh, interesting.
You grow up with this kind of complex and sense of being like, well, there's nothing else out there. Like, why would I leave California no matter how bad it gets? And then finally, it got bad enough to where, me and the wife had to leave, and it was eye opening. It was like basically like leaving the Matrix and realizing like, wow, like there are Trader Joe's outside of Orange County. There are, there are shopping malls, and, every creature comfort exists everywhere. And, California just has this good job of like insulating you to think that it's not as good anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting to think about. I've never lived in a place. Well, I guess now as I sit in Paris, I'm kind of in a place like that, where the average person didn't want to leave. Like
right.
The average person I would interact with would have rather left, and especially Salt Lake, from 2002 to 2009. I always talk about. I think the revolution in Salt Lake happened in 2009, because of it's marked by certain really great restaurants that opened in Salt Lake in 2009. But prior to that, everybody wanted to get out, and that was just the rule. Like you knew that everyone who was moving there was eventually going to be gone. There were not these lifers, people who were coming there. It was not a destination, and all of a sudden, and it wasn't. From the national perspective, it feels like a switch was flipped, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, everyone's going to Salt Lake. It's always been great, but that's absolutely not the case.
Oh, right. Yeah. The infrastructure and everything else there with culinary, just top to bottom, it wasn't quite as a modern
very
city.
Uninteresting.
Gotcha.
Very uninteresting.
Gotcha. They've had sports leagues there for, quite some time though, right? Or was it just the Jazz that were there?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we had the Jazz. There was a funny, people always said it was like I don't know how it could be enforced, but some sort of rule that if you brought a sports team to Salt Lake, it had to have 2 Z's in the name. The Jazz, the Buzz, and then you start to look at the history of teams in Salt Lake, and it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of Z's in all of those. But the Jazz were there, and so even though I got there in 2002, some of my best and closest friends were born and raised Salt Lake, several generations Salt Lake, and they love it. So I'm not saying necessarily that. I was always in this transplant community, something like an expat community of people who were not from Salt Lake, because the people who were in Salt Lake were annoyed that all these transplants were coming. To this day, still the case. Even us earlier transplants got a little bit annoyed that the new transplants, all these Californians coming over and East
right.
Coasters. But I can't remember where I was going with that. You asked about the sports teams.
Yeah, no. So let's back up just a second.
Yep.
So when you moved to Salt Lake, then is that you and your wife that head out there? You said you both were in love. No, not yet. Okay. So when you moved out to Salt Lake, did you have friends there? You already had like a place to stay, or you were just basically a stranger in a city and forged your own path into?
I had a place to stay because I was doing like an intern thing there at a church.
Okay.
And so, but hey, someone in that church housed me. It wasn't a Mormon church, but
sure.
Someone in that house, that church let me live in their place for the summer. And no friends. And my friend Jared was there for a little bit. He came with me from Lubbock, and then he had to go back to Lubbock for school. He wasn't brave enough to fully drop out. But no friends. I've always thrived in these situations in life where I don't have friends. And then I go back, like here in Paris, like not having people. Like I can go into a place where I know nobody, and I love being anonymous. I can't do it forever, but I love being anonymous. And so for about a year, I can be anonymous really happily. And so I had nothing in Salt Lake, nobody, except I started to make some friends with older people at the church. It was an older, almost entirely, north of 50 years old at that church. And so I made some old friends there. And that's how I actually got into running, was the pastor of that church. He was a speedy marathoner. He was like a 240 marathon guy.
Nice.
And he started taking me up into the mountains.
Okay. So that's basically your first introduction to running. And it was, trail running with with some road running as well.
Yep. Yeah, we were running up Big Cottonwood, which is where Brighton Ski Resort is, Brighton and Solitude. He would take me on the road, and we would just run up the road. We'd take 2 cars, and we'd park one of them 6 miles up, and then we'd come back down. And this guy was in his 50s, and I was 19, and I couldn't keep up with him. He was running nonstop up the road, and this is a steep canyon. He's running nonstop up all this windy stuff, and so then he would always get to the car first, and then drive back and pick me up. But it was in there, and then we'd go up to Snowbird, which is where I think this yeah, sure, I think it predates Speed Goat, but Lee, it was his name, Lee Mashburn. He would just run up the gut of Snowbird, and then take the tram down, and which is now the course of Speed Goat. And there was no way we could hang with him on that, like not even close. This crazy fit 50 plus. And that was very foreign to me coming from Lubbock. 50 plus, you had a walker in Lubbock. And this guy was just flying up there. And he just, everyone my age who knew this guy looked up to him and wanted to be like him. And so, he was dragging a bunch of 20 somethings into the mountains with him.
So what was it to you at that time? As far as, were you trying to be more physically fit? Was it an adventurous? Was it athletic? What was it about it that was captivating your attention and you wanted to get up and do this?
So it's funny. It's tied to your question about friendships and all that sort of stuff. It was a moment where I was really getting hungry to have some connection, like deeper connection. And coming out of punk rock and skateboarding and all this sort of stuff, like skateboarding, even though it takes a good bit of fitness, you don't feel tough. And so I had this I had grown fully and completely tired of that lifestyle. And I just, had this sort of, I believe it was sort of this innate thing to want to feel tough. And this was scratching that itch, combined with getting to connect with somebody that I really needed to connect with. I just needed this guy or someone like this guy who was old and doing hard things and very inspiring on so many different levels. So it was first and foremost about the human connection. And second, it was helping me believe something new about myself that I hadn't believed in a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's no better, fellowship than when you're out running with guys like you were talking about on your podcast last week, right? Like holding space for each other, right? So like before you even knew what that term meant, here you were, living it basically.
Great point. Because like Kevin Brown in that podcast said, there's, when our wives or our partners wonder, what are we actually out there when we're on a run with some other guys? What are we actually talking about? I think they'd be shocked. I think they'd be surprised. I shock myself when I'm out there. And if it's the chemicals that are firing that are making me, like the bonding chemicals that are firing, and I'm interested in opening up more, and I'm interested in talking more, even though I can't fully explain it. That's what was happening, and that's what was happening at that point in my life. And I guess that's the genesis. Those runs up Big Cottonwood Canyon were the genesis of seeing how powerful running can be on an emotional level.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's true. Like in weakness, we find strength. And so when you're putting yourself in maybe a vulnerable conversation or being transparent or, helping a buddy out, the run goes by faster. Your legs feel a little bit lighter. That's what, it's all about. So, it's another good key to unlocking the mystery of the 100-miler, right?
Yes, absolutely.
When things start hurting, get vulnerable, because you'll find some strength there.
Yeah, and if there's a scientific explanation for it, if it's the chemicals, if there's something in it that's like lubricating to your joints, I think that happen in there. And talking to my friend Alex, who's a biologist, there's so much good stuff that comes from that those moments of bonding.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So you're running, you're kicking around the trails a little bit. You're still at what, early 20s then at this point? Kinda?
Yeah, 21 years old.
Okay. So you're identifying now as a musician, or the guitar is still in the pawn shop?
I owned a guitar because I started doing the music for that church, and so I had the guitar, but was not thinking of myself as a musician. I did a couple of concerts. Think about coming from like MXPX, Bad Religion sort of vibes to playing sad bastard music, which is what I was doing. So I was constantly at odds with myself of like, why am I playing such silly music? So the common thread through all of every decision I've ever made is this, like, maybe in a serious way, it's like fighting this desire to hate myself for the decisions that I make, and then getting perspective and looking at it without judgment. Like I'm always trying to look at the things I do without judgment, but in the moment on everything, I'm always looking at it with intense judgment. So even if there's a song that I'm writing and it feels such like a dumb song, even if someone will never hear it, like, it's very difficult for me to look on it without judgment. So that's the big effort. So at this moment in my life, I could only look at myself with a lot of judgment musically. And so I think I owned a guitar, but it gave me anxiety and I had to step away from it.
Gotcha. So what are you doing at that point to make ends meet? Like, have you started to scratch the itch of anything entrepreneurial, or where I'm trying to see where we first get the hint that there's this crazy maniacal business creator. So
okay, so the first place that it was really shown through was in those punk rock days, and putting together a tour. We we went on this tour with a band called Honey Locust. They were out of Florida, but on that we played a few shows with a band called Evergreen Terrace, Stairwell, which was coming out of Orange County. I'm almost certain they were great. And then the band that ended up changing their name to Delta, the Delta something.
Where were they out of?
California as well. The
Delta Spirit?
That's it.
No way.
Yeah, they had a different name, but yeah, isn't that funny? They had a different name before that, and I've never been able to remember the name. But then they changed it. They either changed it to Delta Spirit, or some of them left and they formed a new band, and it was Delta Spirit. But I know that they went on to be.
Yeah, I went to some of their early shows in San Clemente, San Diego. Yeah, I mean, they were. That's one of my hands down, one of my favorite bands. I mean, still when I'm just vegging out on
we're going to listen to that as soon as I'm going to listen to that as soon as this episode's over, actually.
Right.
But we played with them in like Oklahoma, Evergreen Terrace. You'd know. I mean, like anyone who's into hardcore would know Evergreen Terrace. I mean, they were at that time. This was 1999, by the way. But we were making that tour happen, and that band was like, in one hand I'm holding this like songwriter frontman for a punk rock band, and on the other hand, like the business side of, like, one time I made some music and my dad was like, that music is great, and his question was, how will anybody know about it? And that has always stuck with me. It doesn't matter how amazing something is that you make, if someone doesn't know about it, it doesn't matter. And so product needs marketing. Product always needs marketing. You could make something, this podcast could be the best podcast ever, and if you don't have a way of people knowing about it, then it doesn't matter. So that was ingrained to me in like 14, 15 years old. Okay, so parents divorce, trying to figure some things out. The world's not totally making sense to me. Moved to Salt Lake. It's starting to make sense. Well, I'm a part of, and on my like business bio, it says I was early stage or started 5 nonprofits. Those were actually all churches. So I was a part of church plants. And for those who don't know what that is, it's just like, hey, there's an area that somebody wants to have a church where there isn't a church. And I was the guy that would come in along, especially living in Salt Lake. So we did that 5 times in Salt Lake. And so I was just the person that could team up and I can just carry a whole bunch. I can do anything for 18 months. Unfortunately, I can also only do things I love for 18 months, but I can do things I hate for 18 months as well. And so I'm the guy that can get anything off the ground, even if it shouldn't get off the ground. Like, I can find a way to get it off the ground. And so but at the time I wouldn't have articulated that way. It's just, hey, I love Salt Lake City. I love music, and I know everybody in this city. And so let me, anybody who wants to do something here, I want to help you. And so I'm doing it. And it's just, then I end up having this one pastor named Kyle Costello, who is now in California, Ojai. He's in Ojai, California now. And he was the one who, I was like so burnt out from working at churches. And he was very supportive and one of my best friends at the time. Well, another guy gave me this test called the Berkman test, and that Berkman basically takes like these maybe 10 to 15 buckets of vocations and says, based off of the millions of other people who've taken this Berkman test, here's like vocational buckets that you should be paying attention to. And this was 2011. And the only thing, so if it's 85 or higher on this scale, then it's probably going to be life-giving. If it's 15 or lower, it's going to deplete you. It's going to destroy you. And you need to run for your life from those things. The only thing that was below 15 was nonprofit clergy work, which is what I was doing. And so I was constantly burnt out. And that can happen in a church setting. That's somewhat normal, but it's also personalities. But in my personality, it wasn't a good fit. And I was always burned out. But over here, I was starting to start this company called La Barba Coffee with my friend Levi, Tim, and Sam. And it was so life-giving. And at the top of this Berkman test, the thing that was most surprising, so here's this musician, this punk rock kid, skateboarder. The number one most life-giving thing this test thought for me was finance. And I thought, I don't understand that. And then it occurred to me, one of the things that my dad had always said was a lot of people in nonprofit work leave that work for mathematical type work because you spend so many years doing things that don't have one singular obvious answer. And it is very hard to find resolution in that. So if it's clergy, if it's church, if it's pastoral work, like it's really hard to say, I did something today. What did I do today? I used to frame houses. If I frame a house, I can step back and see more boards are up. Like I did something today. I've accomplished something. And so to me, finance started to make sense because in the way that I like finance, the way I think about finance, it was like, oh, those numbers, that's the right number. There's one answer to that. It's not philosophical. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. And I can sleep a little bit better. And so I leaned into that. And once that clicked for me of, okay, I've got horsepower to take anything and grow it and get it off the ground. I've got torque. So I can go from 0 to 1 really, really well because I know how to go from -1 to 0 really, really well. So I can take something that's not moving and have it start moving. And then I can take something that started moving and make it move fast. Combine that with knowing finance, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is a very unique space that I play in. And so that's when we were off to the races. My wife was a food writer, and all of a sudden I figured out certain things that were able to be supportive to her so she could be a great product person, a great food writer, a great food photographer. She starts releasing books. I was releasing some more music at this time. Then I started the coffee roasting company, and I got that to the point where my partners no longer wanted to grow it. And I'm a useless CEO. I'm a useless leader if it's not growing. I'm not a 3% year-over-year growth kind of guy. I was the Fortune magazine. I was one of the top 100 CEOs of inner city businesses in 2020 because of how fast our coffee roasting company was going. But when my partners were like, hey, we don't want to invest any more capital in this. You don't want to grow. If you're going to grow more than 20% year-over-year, you have to be putting capital in no matter how successful you are. So I started starting other things. And so within the same 18 months, I just about, destroyed my psyche because we opened 2 bars, bought a ramen restaurant, opened a tea and bookshop. And those were all opening probably 6 months apart from each other. And we still at the same time also had a coffee roasting warehouse. We did our own distribution, which is basically a van going around town, going into grocery stores and going to restaurants. My head was absolutely spinning, but this is where I was at my best. Like I loved this stuff, but that would also be out running. And every time I'd be running, I'd always be running these vacation races in Southern Utah. And I always think, God, I'd give anything to take all of these gifts I have, all these skills that I have. And somehow I really wanted to own vacation races, to be honest. Like I wanted to own Zion, still do, Salem. So it was just like once it clicked, this is a long answer, but once it clicked, it was like, oh, I can only see opportunity. Even if that opportunity, I can only see opportunity to grow something. I can't necessarily see very clearly. I can't see viability clearly.
Right.
But I can see like, and it's also built around like someone's heart. Like if I know that someone wants something, like to me, like that's the language that I tell my wife. Like if you say it's my dream to X, that's like you be careful with that, because if you say that, like for her, it's like, it's my dream to have a bookstore. It's like, okay, we got a bookstore now. So what are we going to do next? Like
that's
you got to make sure
there.
this works.
where does that come from? Because I think we need to highlight just how rare I think that is in this day and age. Because again, like this podcast is a lot about talking about you, but also contrasting to me, because our experiences are similar in where we're at today, but wildly different in who we are and how we got here. Because I mean, I am not the dreamer. Like my wife will say something like, I want to open up my own, vintage boutique. And I'm like, giving her 15 reasons why not, or 15 activities and tasks on what she needs to do first before I can even get on board with conceptualizing this. Yes. And what you just told me would, if my wife heard that, she would smack me in the back of the head and tell me, why can't you be more like Josh? So let's talk about that. How is it that when you hear something like that, it just resonates in a way of like, I'm going to, release the hounds and bring that to life?
I was desperate for someone to do that for me, and I never found anybody who would. And so as a musician who's like putting his heart on his sleeve, not saying that the music was great. You can go listen to it. I'm actually, for my 100th episode, I'll drop this now, I'm going to be releasing 5 new songs on the podcast for the 100th episode.
Nice.
Paris has inspired me. I never had management. I never had, anytime I would start to get close, like to feel like this symbiotic relationship with somebody of like, and to this day, this is still where I have to be careful. I've had 72 investors or business partners in everything that I've done. And every time I get close to thinking, hey, you're like me, we're a lot alike. Like we just want the team to succeed more than I want myself to succeed. And the danger with that is that then I'll actually hurt myself in certain situations, because I'm very team focused. I want the team to win. I want the team to succeed. And it can be at my detriment. Okay, so on the sort of sappy side, no one ever gave that to me, and I desperately wanted to. I vowed like I would never have something that I could give to somebody that would help them accomplish their dream and withhold it. That to me is the worst thing that anybody could do. So if I'm developing a relationship with somebody and I hear like, hey, I really want to do this thing, to me, I think, good God, this is my chance. Like, because how good does it feel to chase your dream? Success, people think it's the like success of the dream and selling the coffee roasting company or selling the restaurants, that's the thing that feels good. There's some validation in that, but what feels good is chasing it. Like it's the chase that feels good. And if I can somehow help somebody in their pursuit of that, like to get them into that situation, that to me is the best feeling in the world. I think the unhealthy side of that is that there's some codependency that can happen in that sometimes for me, where it's like, I really want to help somebody who doesn't want to be helped chase their dream. Some people just want to say, or sometimes my wife just wants to say, wouldn't it be cool if? I don't hear that as a thought exercise.
Right.
Yeah. I hear that as okay. You said that before you were done. I created the LLC, just so you know. So that's, those are the things that are at odd. It's this idea of, people, the bumper sticker was well known, be the change you want to see in the world. We could talk about my thoughts on bumper stickers sometime and how nothing meaningful fits on a bumper sticker. But I wanted to be the thing that I desperately wanted somebody to do for me. And that's a high expectation. It's a really high expectation to say, I want someone to do that for me. But if I can just do it for someone else, there's no expectations involved. And it's just me getting to be excited and pass on a lot of the stuff that I've done to somebody else.
Gotcha. So you talked earlier, just before we got on that tangent, about running the races, and I looked at your ultra sign up, and you're very similar in me in the sense that like we kind of run where our home base is out of. We don't have much or any ultra sign up results outside of the state that we're
that's exactly right.
In, right? Like that's just kind of how we are. So it seemed like, what was it, like 2016? Yeah, 2016 was your first like ultra distance event, right? And
because then they didn't put no, I might North Face Endurance Challenge. I don't know if they loaded their results into ultra sign up. I think
was
I got
it a marathon you ran, or was it a 50K?
Okay, I DNF'd to 50K.
Okay.
At Endurance Challenge. It's the only time I legitimately like hurt myself in a race.
Gotcha.
But maybe that DNF didn't show up on there. Anyway, you're right. 2016 was my 50 miler at Capitol Reef.
Gotcha. And then you pretty much were doing about 2 to 3 a year all the way up through through you moving overseas, basically, right?
Yeah. That was kind of the goal, was no less than 1. And if I could get to 3 in a year, that was just a great year.
Gotcha. What at that time, like, it sounded like you were, drinking through the hose, basically, all in, and on fire for running. What was your training looking like, not being, from a background of athletics or running of any kind? Was this previous mentor helping you with any sort of idea of what it would take training wise to do these things, or what did it look like, and how were you piecing things together?
Yeah. I mean, I run far. So as an introvert, and I didn't necessarily, and all the runners that I knew were kind of similar. Training plans we'd have all loved to have been fast, but none of us were spending the money to get trained to know how to actually go faster.
Right.
So we'd go out on these long training runs, and we'd go far. I'm thinking of my friend Jeremy Cox. He's got 3 kids also, like I do, but they're older. So he was a little bit freer on a Saturday than I've been in the last 11 years. And also he likes doing the overnight training runs. And so sometimes I would, do those with him or wake up early. But for the most part, it was just, honestly, I Run Far and Hal Kerner's Field Guide to Ultra Running. Like, those were the ways that I was looking to trying to have some structure in it. But by and large, my life was so busy with all the businesses and everything that I would, to this day, if you watch me on Strava, you'll see that I run between 3 and 5. That's the only time that I could make it work. I always vowed to myself, even though my wife didn't ask for this, I always vowed to myself that that my love of running would never interfere with family life as much as possible. It would interfere with my professional life. If something was going to suffer, it was going to be my job and not my family. And so I would always try and get as much. I'd either wake up before everyone wakes up, get some work done, and then be dad and husband, then go work until 3, and then run between 3 and 5. And so I was never able, even when I would have a good plan, there was really no way to carry it out. I could only run in the windows that I could run.
Gotcha. So were you building confidence that you were ready for the ultra distance based on more like 40 miles a week average, or doing like a 6-hour long run? Like what was it that was kind of giving you the confidence that you could go tackle those events?
When I swore that I was going to do a 100-miler, like when it got in my heart and it started to emerge, I was going to approach it systematically. Year 1 was 50K, year 2, 50-miler. It was trail marathon, then 50K, then 50-miler, then 100K, then the 100-miler. And that was 5 years. Each one of those represent a year of my longest distance. So I was real methodical and very intimidated by the distance. So I jumped the gun and skipped the 100K and went straight to the 100-miler and DNF'd it. And then I got the 100-miler in year 5. So I should have stuck with the plan. So yeah, I was very, very methodical in it. And my volume, my first attempt that I DNF'd was the best training I had done. And I felt phenomenal that day on that run, until the guy who introduced me to running, Lee, he was doing a 16-mile stretch. This is so classic Lee Mashburn. He's pacing me, and I ran out. I left a water bottle at the aid station, didn't realize it till I was 2 miles out. And so I was carrying at that point only 8 ounces of water on a 9-mile stretch in the middle of the night. And his statement to me was, if I would have known that there was a chance you would need water, I would have worn water myself. This is only a 16-mile run, so I didn't bring any water. so he could have saved me if he had remembered water, but no judgment.
Right.
But then, anyway, got it in the next year. And when my volume, that next year, the way that I got it was, so my family moved to Europe in 2018 for 3 months, 1 month in France, 1 month in Italy, 1 month in Croatia. And every day listened to Bleacher's latest album, which I loved. And I got really good volume in on that trip. Cause I was in that anonymous mode where I'm family man only. And so there was great time to run then. And so I was getting good volume. And good volume for me would be 40 to 50 miles a week. Okay. That's the best I can pull out.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's solid. I think you do that, for a, 12, 15 week period and throw in some good long runs in there. I think you're certainly physically capable of taking
Yeah.
it on. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least to get the finish, right? So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not to necessarily knock the performance out, but my goal just to finish it was enough.
so I had written down here because I know you've done some things. You had like 10 or 11, different businesses that were in the retail or in the food and beverage space. And I remember when I first got into being a fan of running, there's a guy, Chris Brown and Devin Yanko, who were both, culinary background, right? Either they owned restaurants or they were actually, pastry chef, or I can't remember exactly, but, I could never understand like how you could have like a career that was a passion, project, or you had to invest so much into it for such little return sometimes, right? And then you have a hobby that's equally as demanding. Like, how did you do it? How do you think they do it? Like, what's the, is it just you're wired differently? It's just such a fascinating, combination. Because for me, my career is very uninspiring. And so when I get into running, that's my space to just, be myself and be creative, and it's an outlook I look forward to. But it seems like for those who are in creative spaces or entrepreneurs themselves, like, it's kind of hard for me to conceptualize how those two fit together and you make them work.
Yeah. I mean, so to take that one step more granular would be within being in a passion, being in your own business. You break that down into three different things. You've got a product person, a manager, and an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is the one who pushes things forward, like a speedboat. That's the person who's making the boat go forward, but leaving this wake behind it. That wake has to get cleaned up by the manager. And let's say the boat that you're on is the product. So all I'm doing is driving. As I play the role of classic entrepreneur. I'm not a product person, so I drive it forward. I go forward. The thing that I do doesn't take a lot of time. It's a lot of weight. So the hardest thing about my role in every business that I've ever done is the weight is massive. The time commitment is not. If you're Devin, I believe her husband is Nathan, and he worked at Nathan Yanko was at the world famous bread shop. Chris, so gosh, I'm blanking on all this. World famous bread shop in San Francisco.
Okay.
Tartine.
There you go.
Yes. So he was at Tartine. But he's making the bread, and they're behind. I never roasted the coffee. I never mixed a cocktail. I never made the ramen. I don't know where the light switch is in the kitchen on any of those places. But when that switch turned on, the lights came on, and that was my responsibility. And then marketing to get people in the door. So the way that you have to have, when you think about like a pressure cooker, there's the release valve. If you're an entrepreneur and you don't have a really good release valve and you don't keep it open, you can't have it closed and all this pressure build up and then you just explode. You have to have that release valve always open so the pressure never gets to you and never owns you. And to me, that open pressure valve was running. So I could only do those entrepreneurial things that I did and still do because I run. If I didn't run, I couldn't do it. So it's not like, to me, I don't see it as two different things. I see it as I'm trying to make this business thing happen. And if I don't ultra trail run, if I don't have ultra trail ambition happening in real time, then it doesn't work. It fails.
Gotcha. So are you not giving yourself as much credit, or am I misinterpreting it then? Like, weren't you also building some of the culture and, some of the community around the businesses that you were starting, or right? Because you make it sound like you were just making sure that the finances were there to where the power turned on. But I think there was, more creative energy that you were throwing into it too, as well.
Yeah. So, I would do almost all the brand work, not on all. I shared the brand work with my friend Asher on the bars and the taco shop and the ramen shop. A lot of it was like the big picture wrangling, when I'm the baby of the family. I've got two older brothers, but I often feel like in a business relationship, I'm an older brother type. Like I'll come in and just make sure that everything is, I can build systems. I can't live in systems. So I can build the initial systems so that things will work well. But I'm messy. So if anyone listens to this who acquired a business from me or anything like that, they know that like, hey, I don't want to oversell myself as this buttoned up, entrepreneur. I'm messy. I'm super messy, and I'm forgetful. But my hand is in everything, keeping that flywheel going. So yes, I'm marketing. I have opinions on product when they ask. If they don't want my opinion, then they don't need to ask. And you know what I mean? Sometimes people ask for their opinion, but what they really want is to be celebrated rather than have a critical feedback. So I have this switch. I'm in this mode, and we're gonna accomplish this thing. So if you say, hey, I want to open a restaurant, we will only talk about opening that restaurant. I lose track and focus on who you are as a person and what you feel and all those sort of things, because we're on a mission right now. Like you said, you want to open a restaurant. We're going to do this. And so I'm kind of in all of the conversations on all these things. We also did a private placement fund, which is like a private equity fund where we raised money and bought a whole bunch of fourplexes. And so I'm raising the money. I'm talking to all the investors. I've got a partner in that. We're wrangling. We're doing the upgrades. And it's just like, hey, this is what we're doing. I'm not great at pausing, putting my arm around you. How are you doing? Are you okay? That personality is out there. I'm not the best at that. I'm far from it. I'm great at mission. If we're doing something, let's do that. And so, yeah, I get real involved with all that. I get real involved with everything except for making the product.
Gotcha. So you're now in the trail, running business space, right? You've got Borderlands podcast, you've got, the events that you're building out, you've got the app in development.
Yeah.
Contrast it then, because it doesn't sound like necessarily, you said, you didn't roast the beans, you didn't mix the cocktails, right? Like, so some of these businesses you probably got familiar with, but I don't know if they ever really were as, passion projects as your music or your running. How much different and fulfilling is it to be in the trenches for something that you love, like running, and being able to throw in your entrepreneurial, energy?
Yeah. I mean, so you arrived at it logically. This is the hardest business because I am doing the product and I'm just not a product person. So with the app, I separated it from Borderlands. It's now its own business, and I brought on a product partner and a tech partner. And for anyone who tried the app versus what it's looking like now, now this feels like a very professional app because I'm totally out of the product. With Borderlands, I'm still the heart and soul of the product. My dream for Borderlands. So if Borderlands is media, and then over here I have events, but I have operating product partners for the events, Joey and Jared. So I separated that from Borderlands so I could get product people in. And now media is just me. My dream would be to eventually bring in talent that is far better than me, that can be like the face of it, and build this network. And there's all of there's great podcasters, there's great documentaries. The only reason I've been the subject of Borderlands documentaries to this point is because it's easier that way for it to be me. And the story resonated, with everybody about all the DNFs that I've had, but ultimately I can't be in the product too much longer. I've got to get to that scale point where I'm bringing in, like my guy who does my documentaries. I wish he was doing every bit of media from top to bottom within Borderlands, because when I'm doing it, I'm editing a video. I just edited the Sermlands video. I'm not a video editor, but I've got a mission in mind, and it's just me. And so I'm dragging my own ass right now and going toward the mission and the goal. But it's right now, because I love it so much, I can do it. I can't do it forever, but I can model what I hope it will look like. So I'm modeling what I hope it will look like, the amount of stuff I'm putting out. By the end of this year, I'll probably have done 112 podcasts in 1 year. And I've all these videos, and I'm modeling what I need other people to come in alongside me and 10X it. You know what I mean?
Right. So that's good self-awareness. You know, that 18-month clock is ticking.
Yes. Oh, it's a ticking.
Right.
Yeah.
So really then the only things that are consistent, right, that just are going to be part of who you are going to be your dad, your husband, you're a runner, and you're a musician. But everything else kind of has ebbs and flows in how you are going to be building things out and transitioning.
Yes, absolutely. And so I have this, so there's an asterisk on that 18-month thing, is that everything has been 18 months except for coffee. And I did coffee for 8 years, even though I had other stuff going at the same time. And what I've said, once I really started to catch a vision for what's possible with Borderlands, I thought this is going to be another one of the 8-year businesses. It's not going to be the 18 months, which has only happened once. But if I can get out of the product and really just be driving vision forward and fundraising and monetizing and all that sort of stuff, I mean, I think the sky's the limit. I think 10X in the next 12 months would be simple if I can get to that point.
So you brought coffee back up, and I had wanted to ask you about this because you have a good perspective of it, because you've been, overseas, in the running culture, and then, you've had, coffee houses here in Salt Lake. So one of the things I've noticed is the coffee house, the boutique coffee shop in, Canada or London, Paris, right, anywhere else other than the United States, it seems, is really a hub for social run clubs. And it doesn't seem like it has that same presence or meaning here in the United States. So have you experienced that? Do you think am I missing it there? Like, to me, it seems like in the United States, the beer culture is more of the running beverage of choice. And I think it limits, because you can't really have beers at 6 a.m, right? But you can meet up at these hybrid coffee shops that also have, Satisfy clothing or a Norda shoe, you know what I mean? Like, they have like kind of this more natural harmony with runners, right? It's, it's being healthy, it's being good to yourself, it's early morning, What do you think there?
That's a good question. We did 7 coffee shops in Salt Lake, and there's this weird thing, and so I don't know. I think it's unique to Salt Lake. I don't know, because it's the only place I've done it, and that is Salt Lake is very competitive. It is not a unified group of people, and so and I could think of a number of examples, even in trail running, like right now in Salt Lake. Like if we could all just get aligned with each other, what a great thing that would be. But people don't necessarily always want to be, let's say, if I couch it in religious terms, they don't always want to be a blessing to other people. They don't want to be a gift to other people. When people start to build their own thing, they want to hold it really close and protect it because it's scarce and the world is scarce and there's not an abundance of out there. I think that one of the reasons that it's hard as the coffee shop owner is that all of these people were wildly loyal to, maybe they'd be loyal to my shop, La Barba, but maybe some were loyal to Blue Copper, and then some were loyal to Public. And so if Public was holding that run club, these people aren't going to go to it, or the Blue Copper people won't. And it's a small town. Salt Lake City proper is like 200,000 people. So there's this weird thing in Salt Lake where even in the music scene, very, very disconnected. There were some great bands that came from there. The Used, Neon Trees. In the last 20 years, there's been some really great bands. Before that, the Osmonds, but this outside of Provo has this really nice music scene. The rest of it is like very siloed, and a band that gets big, they don't want to share their audience with somebody even. It's just very protective, very much keeping what's mine is mine. So the reason we even tried it with cycling at our coffee shops. People just didn't want to go support something that wasn't like their core thing. It was this really weird competitive deal. So that's part of the explanation in Salt Lake. But I still feel it now. Like, you think it's such a great community like trail running, one of the best communities of all types. There's still this weird disintegrated feeling within the trail community, even a small community like Salt Lake.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just fascinating. You plug into the social medias and you see, some of these great, run clubs, and you're just like, man, like, maybe we're just more, spread out, right? Like, we don't have these, hubs. I don't live in the Metro Phoenix area, right? So maybe it's just we're just too big of cities or too big of suburban areas that, it's a little bit harder, and there's very few cities in the United States where, this is even possible, so maybe it does exist in those cities and I just don't see them on my socials.
And to put it generously, coffee shops, and because of urban sprawl and stuff, like, coffee shops maybe aren't necessarily always located in a good spot as a launch point for a run.
Gotcha.
So, there's generous explanations as well as my cynical one.
Right on, man. So you're doing everything now in a space that makes you happy, but you have an exit strategy. So talk about that. Do you feel the pressure of it? Or are you starting to see, things come together in a familiar way that you did with La Barbara and other successful ventures? Yeah.
I mean, so one of the things that I'm best at is just developing relationships, because I meet somebody, and here I'll just give everybody a lesson who's listening. The best thing that you can ever do when you meet somebody new is ask them about them. Like that is you want to develop a new friend. You want a new network person in your business network. When you meet them, ask them questions about them that they're not used to getting, that show that you really care and that you're actually paying attention to the human across from you. Thankfully, that jives really well with my personality type. I'm just so curious. And so I've built a really great network. I've got all the right relationships in this business with the right people. Monetizing is still the biggest challenge. Because the product right now is media. And so you got to grow to a certain number of eyes and ears. For me, like, because when I 100% own something, I don't think as much about the strategy, even though you always kind of start something with the end in mind, begin with the end in mind. For me, it's, with Borderlands, it's because it's been such a love affair because of the industry I love so much. I've just been thinking about 12 months, like the Tony Shea from, Zappos Shoes was always make a 12-month plan and a 10-year plan and nothing in between. So what's a crazy thing that you think could happen and what will happen in the next 12 months? So that's all I'm constantly doing with Borderlands. What could be with this thing in 10 years? How cool could it be? What could it mean to the world? But practically I'm only building 12 months at a time. And the flywheel is moving, even though it's confusing as to what it actually is from a product standpoint. And that's because I'm not a product person. So right now, Borderlands Media more so looks like an expression of my relationships, which that's who I am. So the podcast has all these great people on it and all these great conversations about things that are interesting and maybe slightly different than other places. A conversation that I'm having with Michael Versteeg is going to be very different than one that Debo has or that Finn has. It's like, I've got my own spin. I've got my relationships. I'm doing my own thing. But ultimately, to monetize, I've got to increase eyes and ears, and then bring in brand partners. That's the media play. So I've got to 10x this thing to really get meaningful, I think. And I do see that as possible. But there's also this question of runway. How long can I hold on to do it? And that's the question. That's the question right now.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think you're every bit the person and guy with the background and love for running to realize those numbers and be that brand in the space that we're in. I kind of made three buckets, that I thought were important in business, no matter what you're in, but especially kind of in one that's more athletic based. We're sitting here talking about running and how we engage with the sport, and we've got people listening, right? It's basically credibility, authority, and relatability, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you certainly fill all three buckets. And I start to think of it like, like if you're playing, Madden and you've got like a player profile and it's starting to like talk about the percentages of like, hey, his agility, his speed, his strength, right? Like of those three, like what do you think, is your strongest? Where do you think? Because when I look from the outside, I think I want to give you credibility. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I think too often times, like we want to put on the pedestal, the people that come from the sport within and have incredible performance results. We want to give them the loudest platform or the biggest platform, the loudest microphone and voice in the sport, or authority, right? We want to give somebody that's an established coach, right? They've been coaching these elites and they've got authority And then, relatability, I think that's where, guys like you and I, or Joe, Coscione, we have the relatability because we're kind of more like the average listener.
Yeah.
But I think you have everything there in spades because of your entrepreneurial background, and where you come from in these other industries. So that's kind of where I wanted to wrap up. I wanted to give these 3 buckets, some definition and shape, and then, kind of see where your thoughts were on, what you think your attributes are as far as strengths go.
Yeah. Say them one more time. Credibility,
authority, and relatability.
Yeah. I would say, and I don't know how I got this. I mean, maybe it's being the baby of the family, is that I don't have an ounce of doubt that I can do something. And that's bad. That's good and bad, obviously, because every investment, everything that I've tried to do has not worked. The tea and bookstore was a disaster. Unfortunately, so I take all of those things and think, the authority, credibility. One more time. What's the other one? Authority, relatability. I mean, those are 3 things that if those were all the 3 things, I do, confidently say that I've got those things. My credibility comes from you can't, there's no argument that you could make that I'm only doing this because I'm good at it, at running. You know what I mean? Celebrating last place and being second to last place I finished 2 of 10 100-milers, and this year I got second to last place, and can't wait to sign up for another one. Come on. I'm in it because I freaking love this so much. And right now I feel like my soul's shriveling here in Paris. I thought I could get into road running, and I am enjoying it, and I'm going to run on the road, and I am going to be better for it, but I am dying to run in the desert right now. And that's not an exaggeration. I just feel like I'm shriveling. So I love all of those things. I don't know. I'd have to really think what else is there if those are all 3 of the things, and I believe I have them, then it's just a matter of time. And if you look at anything that comes off like an overnight success is generally 10 years in the making,
Right.
And so I just feel like keeping my head down and continuing to do those things. Yeah, that's thought provoking. So this is me on my heels, thinking, if I got those, it's just a matter of time, and then developing those taking all that. And I was telling my son this the other day, there's an element in business. You can call it whatever you want, but there's an element of something that's luck-like. So you can be great at something. You can have all the skills. You can have the perfect mission for your business. You have a great product. And on some levels, you are still subject to running into that person at a coffee shop who just happens to be the ticket that you've been waiting for. You could have never planned on it, and that's how you go forward. And to be honest, with a brand relationship right now, that's where I'm at. I'm positioned. I'm ready. I'm so ready for that lucky moment right now with Borderlands. And I'm continuing to try and grow the numbers, all that sort of stuff, until I find that thing. And that thing may never perfectly be there, but I think the spirit of it is there. I'm ready for it. I'm positioned for it. I'm not letting it slow me down that I don't have it yet. And I'm continuing to go forward. So
awesome, man.
Great question.
Yeah, dude. Well, I think that's a great spot to leave it. I think, I hope the listeners enjoyed it. We definitely got into the weeds more, got a little bit more personal, kind of left running on the back burner, which was my intention. We certainly talk enough about running on all the other Bad Runner Takes episodes we've done together. But I personally just want to thank you. I was somebody that reached out to you, with just a desire to come in and, participate with Borderlands, and you opened up that opportunity for me. And we're talking about doing stuff, on my own. So, listeners, keep your ears out, keep your eyes open. Eventually Wolfrunner podcast might be something that you'll be able to give a follow to. And I couldn't have done it without Josh and his support and his mentorship. So he's certainly the right guy in the sport, and we just got to keep championing the voices in the sport that are doing it right. So absolutely. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation.
This was fun. Thank you.
You bet, man.
All right. See you.